A dog trots past you on the sidewalk, tied up outside a coffee shop, waiting patiently for its owner to come back out. You have never seen this animal before in your life. No history, no context, not even eye contact yet. And still, something inside you shifts instantly before you have made a single conscious decision about it. Your knees bend, your hand reaches out, your voice drops into a register you would never use in a work meeting. Some soft, high, slightly ridiculous coo, like you are greeting a newborn instead of a stranger's leashed animal on a public sidewalk. And the strange part is how completely normal this feels while it is happening. Because this is not a you thing. It is not a dog person thing or a grew up on a ranch thing or some personality quirk you can pin on your upbringing. It shows up in every culture, every age group, every background researchers have ever bothered to study. We reach for dogs, we reach for cats, we reach for rabbits, goats, guinea pigs, occasionally a large, unbothered iguana at a reptile expo. We cannot seem to keep our hands to ourselves around anything covered in fur, feathers, or fuzz. Nobody trains us to do this. And somehow, almost nobody stops long enough to ask why. So let's actually ask. The usual explanation people reach for is that it's simply a personal preference, that some people are just animal people and others aren't, as if the whole thing were a matter of taste rather than biology. That framing does not hold up well once you actually go looking at what happens inside the body and brain in the seconds before your hand ever makes contact. Something considerably older than personal taste is running the show, and it operates on nearly everyone the same way. Whether or not they'd ever describe themselves as an animal person, and whether they grew up around animals constantly or almost never at all. If questions like that are the reason you end up down a rabbit hole on this channel every week, subscribing just means the next one finds you instead of the other way around. The obvious answer is that animals are cute, and you want to touch cute things. Simple enough, case closed, back to your day. Except that explanation collapses almost immediately once you look at what cuteness actually does to your brain. When you look at a creature with a large forehead, relative to its face, big round eyes, a small nose, and soft rounded features, your brain does not produce some vague, generic, warm feeling and move on. It drops into a very specific, well-documented neurological state. The foundational idea here goes back to an Austrian researcher named Konrad Lorenz, who in the 1940s described what he called Kindchen schema, German for baby schema. His argument was straightforward. Certain physical proportions, a round face, oversized eyes, a small chin, soft uncoordinated movements, evolved in human infants specifically to hijack the adult brain and force a caregiving response. Evolution built an emotional exploit directly into the shape of a baby's face. Lorenz's further claim, decades ahead of the tools that would eventually confirm it, was that those same proportions trigger identical responses when they show up in a completely different species. Your brain does not run a species check before deciding whether to care. It sees the proportions, and it fires the same circuitry regardless of whether the creature in front of you is your own child or a stranger's terrier. Modern brain imaging backs this up almost exactly the way Lorenz predicted, using tools he never had access to. Researchers scanning people while they view images of baby animals consistently find activity spiking in the orbitofrontal cortex, along with regions tied to reward processing and emotional significance. Looking at something cute is not a passive experience your brain quietly absorbs. It is an active event. Your brain treats the sight of a round-faced, big-eyed creature the same way it treats things that are genuinely biologically important to your survival, and all of that happens before you have laid a single finger on the animal. There is also a simpler, older signal buried inside all of this that most people never think to check: your pupils. Researchers who track eye movement and pupil response while showing people photographs of infants and baby animals have found measurable pupil dilation, a purely involuntary response your eyes produce without your permission, well before you consciously register why an image feels appealing. Your body is casting a vote before your mind has finished forming an opinion. Touch is an entirely separate system stacked on top of all of that. Here is something most people never stop to consider. Human touch is not one sense. It is a whole collection of separate sensory systems running in parallel underneath your skin. Different types of receptors respond to pressure, vibration, texture, and temperature, each one wired slightly differently. One category in particular, studied in real depth by researchers including the neuroscientist Francis McGlone, is known as C-tactile afferents. These nerve fibers are tuned almost perfectly to one very specific kind of contact: slow, gentle stroking, somewhere in the range of 1 to 10 centimeters per second. Nothing faster, nothing sharp, nothing forceful. When these fibers activate, the signal does not just travel to the part of your brain that maps where you are being touched. It also reaches regions tied to emotion, social bonding, and reward. These fibers appear to exist specifically to make gentle touch feel meaningful rather than simply detected. What makes them unusual is how they are built. Unlike the fast, heavily insulated nerve fibers that report sharp detail, exactly where you were touched and how hard, C-tactile afferents conduct signals slowly and imprecisely on purpose. They are not designed to tell your brain the location of a touch with any real accuracy. They are designed almost entirely to deliver an emotional signal, which is part of why stroking a pet does not feel like data. It feels like comfort. Now connect that to fur. Running your hand slowly across a soft coat activates C-tactile afferents about as efficiently as any material in nature. The texture, the gentle give, the consistent warmth, all of it lines up almost perfectly with what those fibers are built to detect. Pet a dog, and you are directly triggering a pathway that evolved for human social bonding, now firing because of a golden retriever standing on a sidewalk. That is not a poetic exaggeration. That is measurable chemistry. And the chemical in question is oxytocin. Oxytocin gets the tired nickname of the love hormone, a label most neuroscientists find a little embarrassing given how much more it actually does. It rises during physical affection of nearly every kind: hugging someone you care about, holding an infant, sitting close to a partner. Multiple controlled studies have shown that a short window of interacting with a dog, petting it, holding eye contact, sitting near it, produces a measurable jump in oxytocin in the bloodstream. And the detail that makes this almost unfair in how wholesome it is: the dog's oxytocin rises at the same time. Two separate nervous systems, human and dog, locking into the exact same bonding chemistry simultaneously over a few minutes of contact on a sidewalk. You walked up to a stranger's dog and briefly, biologically, fell a little bit in love with it. So did the dog. That is not sentiment. That is the system working exactly the way it is supposed to. It is worth pausing on how strange that actually is if you say it plainly. Two entirely different species, with different brains, different lifespans, different evolutionary histories, are capable of triggering the exact same bonding chemical in each other through nothing more than eye contact and a few minutes of gentle physical contact. There is no negotiation involved, no shared language, no understanding of context on either side. The chemistry does not require any of that. It only requires proximity, gentleness, and a little time. Step back further, though, because there is another layer almost nobody brings up. Why softness specifically? Why does fur produce this reaction and a smooth stone does not, no matter how nicely shaped it is? Texture matters because of how early the association gets built. Infants spend an enormous share of their earliest development pressed against warm, soft surfaces: skin, blankets, another body's warmth, long before language or conscious memory exist to file the experience away consciously. Softness gets wired to safety at the most basic level your nervous system has, and that wiring does not go away once you grow up and stop noticing it happening. Temperature plays its own quiet role here too. Warmth signals aliveness at a deep, automatic level. Rest your hand on something warm and slightly yielding, and measurable stress markers begin dropping almost immediately. Heart rate easing, skin conductance falling, cortisol beginning its decline. Your body is not consciously deciding to relax. It is recognizing warmth as evidence of another living creature nearby and quietly dialing down its own threat response in response to that signal. Then there is sound, because touch was never the whole story. Cat purring has been studied in enough biological and clinical detail that the more researchers examine it, the stranger it becomes. The sound comes from rapid, repeated contractions of the muscles around the voice box, vibrating dozens of times each second on both the inhale and the exhale, which is what produces that steady rumble. Domestic cat purring generally falls somewhere between 25 and 150 hertz. with the most common range sitting closer to the 25 to 50 Hz band. Frequencies in roughly that range have shown up in clinical research linked to promoting bone healing and reducing inflammation in soft tissue, and there are physical therapy devices built specifically to deliver mechanical vibration in that exact frequency window to help patients recover faster from fractures and muscle injuries. Which means a cat curled up on your chest, purring away, while ignoring you completely, may be quietly vibrating your body at frequencies your own tissue responds to. Cats appear to be accidentally therapeutic while doing absolutely nothing on purpose, and we still cannot get enough of them. Now, let's address the compulsive part of all this, because this might be the strangest piece of the whole puzzle. Feeling good around soft, cute animals is one thing. Managing to override that feeling in public is apparently a separate skill entirely, and a lot of us do not have it. Intellectually, that you should ask before petting someone's dog. The cat currently backing away from you at a friend's house has already sent two clear signals. You reach out anyway. Part of that comes down to approach motivation, the same basic circuitry that pulls you toward food when you are hungry or toward someone you find attractive. When your brain flags something as rewarding, cute, warm, and soft, checks every box that circuitry looks for, it generates a pull toward that thing that arrives before conscious thought does. Your hand is often already moving before the sentence "I want to pet" that dog has fully formed in your head. Then there is the phenomenon researchers now call cute aggression, and it sounds far more alarming than it actually is. It is that strange, almost aggressive urge that shows up when something is so overwhelmingly cute that your positive response outpaces what your system seems built to handle gracefully. The instinct to squeeze a puppy's face, to say something like, "I could just eat you up," while having zero actual intention of harming anything. Researchers at a major research university studied this directly and found it is not random noise. It looks like a regulatory response, a way for the brain to counterbalance an emotional reaction that is running hotter than the system can comfortably process. The urge to gently squeeze a kitten into oblivion is, according to this research, a sign that your emotional regulation system is working exactly as intended, not a sign that something is wrong with you. Researchers studying this effect have also noted that people who experience stronger cute aggression tend to show a faster emotional recovery afterward, as though the strange little burst of mock aggression works almost like a release valve, letting an otherwise overwhelming wave of tenderness drain off before it becomes too intense to manage comfortably. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. Is any of this unique to humans, or does the pull toward other species show up elsewhere in the animal kingdom? The answer turns out to be no, not entirely. Researchers have documented primates in the wild approaching animals of entirely different species and interacting with them in ways that serve no obvious survival purpose, handling small creatures gently, engaging in what looks very much like play, showing behavior researchers describe carefully as apparent curiosity and gentleness. There is a well-known case involving a lowland gorilla who was taught a version of sign language over decades of research and kept several pet cats across her lifetime. She requested them by name using signs she had chosen herself, handled them with consistent gentleness, and when one of her cats died, she reportedly produced signs her researchers interpreted as grief. A gorilla mourning a small domestic cat, because the closeness and the physical contact had genuinely meant something to her. Researchers who study animal behavior have documented similar cross-species gentleness in other captive great apes as well, suggesting this was not a one-off curiosity tied to a single unusually social gorilla, but something closer to a shared capacity sitting quietly across multiple branches of the primate family. The drive toward touch is not a uniquely human invention. It runs deeper into the animal kingdom than most people assume. And if you want to understand exactly how deep this runs with dogs specifically, you have to look at coevolution, because the bond between humans and dogs did not happen by accident. Estimates for how long humans and dogs have been living, working, and sleeping alongside each other range anywhere from roughly 15,000 to 40,000 years, depending on which research you consult, which is more than enough time for two species to measurably reshape each other. Dogs read human social cues in ways their closest wild relatives simply do not. Even wolves, raised by people from birth. Dogs follow a pointed finger without training. Dogs track human eye movement. Dogs make eye contact with people in a way that is functionally distinct from how wolves make eye contact, and that eye contact sets off the same oxytocin loop described earlier. Here is the detail that still catches people off guard. Dogs have a facial muscle, formerly called the levator anguli oculi medialis, that is either missing entirely or barely developed in wolves. That muscle produces the inner brow raise, the classic puppy dog eyes look that makes something in your chest quietly give way. Dogs evolved actual anatomy specifically to produce that expression. It did not happen by chance. It is the outcome of thousands of years of selection pressure, favoring dogs that were more successful at triggering warmth, feeding, and closeness from the humans around them. The puppy eyes are not an accident of cuteness. They are the payoff of an extremely long negotiation over exactly what makes a human being reach out a hand. Dogs were not passively domesticated. They were active participants the entire time. It is closer to the truth to say humans and dogs domesticated each other. That same selection pressure shows up directly in how many modern dog breeds are shaped. Breeders, often without framing it in these exact scientific terms, have spent generations favoring rounder skulls, larger relative eyes, and softer, more puppyish facial proportions in a number of popular breeds, effectively locking a permanent adult version of Kinchin schema onto a fully grown animal's face. It is the same underlying trigger described earlier in this video, just deliberately preserved through breeding instead of appearing briefly during infancy and then fading. There is a modern angle to all of this that the original research on baby schema never had reason to anticipate: the enormous adult market for oversized, round-faced plush toys. Walk through nearly any big box store, and you will find entire sections devoted to soft, exaggeratedly round stuffed animals marketed directly at fully grown adults, not children, and selling in volumes that would have surprised toy companies a generation ago. Every design decision, the oversized eyes, the rounded proportions, the impossibly soft texture, is engineering the exact same Kinchin schema response Lorenz described nearly a century ago, minus the actual animal. Adults are paying real money for objects whose entire purpose is to trigger a caregiving response their nervous system cannot easily distinguish from the real thing. There is a clinical version of this story too, playing out well beyond hospital hallways. Equine therapy programs built specifically for military veterans dealing with post-traumatic stress have grown substantially over the past 2 decades, and a large part of the documented benefit does not come from riding at all. It comes from grooming, from the slow, repetitive act of running a brush across a horse's coat, an animal large enough to make its calm presence physically undeniable. Veterans in these programs consistently report drops in anxiety and improved sleep. And researchers tracking the physiological side of this find the same oxytocin and cortisol shifts already described, just triggered by an animal roughly the size of a small car instead of a lapdog. And then there is the version of this drive that shows up when there is no animal in the room at all. Videos built entirely around slow, deliberate, repetitive sounds and gentle visual attention, generally filed under the label ASMR, have become one of the most watched categories of content online, and a meaningful share of it centers on exactly the sensations already described here: soft brushing sounds, slow stroking motions, close, gentle attention. People are seeking out a screen-based simulation of the same tactile soothing they would get from a real animal, evidence that the underlying craving is strong enough to chase even a digital substitute when the real thing is not available. The rise of weighted blankets follows a similar logic, offering firm, even, sustained pressure across the body that mimics the physiological effect of being held or pressed against something warm, marketed almost entirely on the promise of calming an overstimulated nervous system down. None of these products invented a new need. They simply found new ways to satisfy an old one. None of this happens in a vacuum either. During periods of enforced isolation, people who share their homes with pets consistently report better mental health outcomes, lower baseline cortisol, and reduced rates of anxiety and depression compared with people who do not. Researchers have specifically tested whether this comes from companionship in a general sense or from physical contact itself, and the evidence increasingly points to touch as a distinct, measurable factor of its own, not just having another presence in the room. In hospital settings, structured animal visits reliably lower reported pain and pre-procedure anxiety and improve emotional recovery. Therapy dogs brought into schools measurably lower stress responses in students during high pressure moments. And the timeline on all of this is fast. Somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes of direct contact with an animal produces statistically significant shifts in cortisol and oxytocin. Your nervous system does not take its time deciding what it needs. It knows almost immediately what it wants, and it responds the moment it actually gets it. Maybe that is the real reframe worth sitting with. We treat the urge to pet every animal we encounter like a funny personality quirk, the reason you show up 10 minutes late because a dog ambushed you on the sidewalk. What it is actually pointing toward is much older and much more serious than that. Touch is how mammals signal safety to one another. It is one of the primary tools nervous systems use to regulate each other without a single word being exchanged. A wordless version of I see you, I am here, you are not alone. For nearly the entire span of human history, people lived in close, constant physical contact with animals, working animals, farm animals, animals sleeping nearby for warmth and protection. The clean separation we now consider normal between humans and animals is an extremely recent development on an evolutionary timescale, and our nervous systems have not caught up to it. They are still expecting regular contact with something warm, soft, and alive. None of this makes the impulse embarrassing, even though it can feel that way in the moment, crouched on a public sidewalk cooing at a dog you met 4 seconds ago. It makes the impulse honest. It is one of the few reactions left in modern life that has not been talked out of you by decades of professional norms and polite restraint. Somewhere underneath the version of yourself that answers emails and sits through meetings, there is still a much older nervous system quietly scanning every room, every sidewalk, every waiting area for something warm and soft enough to reach toward. You were never actually going to walk past that dog without petting it. The only real question was ever going to be how many seconds it would take.